are ready until, let me just get out of the way, and then I am going to let Dr. Reyna Montoya take over. She's doing the introductions today, so let's all engage in this amazing speaking.
Oh, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Professor Madeline Adelman. I'm one of Professor Broberg's colleagues here. You know his name is Greg. I know we know that. And I'm just so privileged to be here to introduce our speaker, who is a return engagement. Our speaker was so fabulous, and the organization that she founded and has been these years is so important to what we're doing in this course that we here again. Wanted to be one student who probably born here 4 years ago. It was right around the last election.
Yes. And it was during the pandemic, so very different.
Yeah, very different. Glad to be in person here. So I want to say that Reyna Montoya is the founder, CEO, and board member of Aliento. The phrase that is used by the organization is transforming trauma into hope and action. And the work that you're going to hear about includes what some people call artivism, arts activism, ally engagement, and what I want to say, powerfully effective advocacy by those most affected by the inequalities associated with lack of immigration status. I could be here all hour listing Reyna's incredible awards, accolades, fellowships. You can go to the website and take a look at all the things that she's accomplished and recognized. I want to make a pitch for you after class to go look at a TEDx talk that she did at UC Santa Barbara. I know that you're going to hear a little bit about Reyna's background, about her own immigration to 2003, as being a documented social entrepreneur, as being a community organizer, an educator, obviously a nonprofit executive, and also a dancer, multidisciplinary. What's also, I think, important for you all to know is that just a little bit ago, she was in your seat. So Reyna holds a bachelor's degrees in both political science and transborder studies, as well as a dance minor right here from Arizona State University. She also has a master's in secondary education from Grand Canyon University, which we're so okay with you being here. Great. And I want to notice as well that she has an executive education certificate from the Harvard School of Government. I know we're going to hear about some of those incredible public incidences or accomplishments that you've had in terms of undocumented immigration. And all I want to say is that one of the most incredible things that we saw was one of the things that you did, which was resulted in the stopping of your own father's. So lots of stories to share. And I'm looking forward to hearing them again and more of them since the last one we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody. How are you all doing? Good. Is that like after lunch kind of energy? Yeah. Well, hopefully this is a conversation also for our virtual folks. Feel free to like drop your questions, drop your comments. I think I might see the emojis in the screen, so feel free to do that. My name is Reyna Montoya. I use pronouns she, her, ella. So feel free to, at any moment, feel free to interrupt me. You have that permission. You can raise your hand. I think we have some mics going on. I like to have more of a Q&A as we go along. And then if there's something that I will cover later on, I'll just be like, wait a second, hold that thought, and then we'll come back to it. Does that sound good? Anything that you need or anything that you want to take away from today? No? Quiet crowd? Over there?
I want to like see what exactly your organization does to help.
And I'll repeat back for the people in the virtual world. So someone here said that they want to learn what is Aliento all about and what do we do to support or help people. Any others? What would you like to take away? You can either sit through like an hour, 30 minutes of torture, or you can engage. Let's go. So how to be an ally for your friends who are undocumented. Thank you for that. Any others?
What inspired you to get into this line of work?
What inspired me to get in this line of work? So we have a couple good takeaways. If you're a little shy, feel free to, hopefully you warm up. How many of you speak Spanish by a show of hands or emojis in the virtual world? Okay. So check me on this, but aliento, it's a word that literally translates into breath. But when you give aliento to someone, it's like giving words of encouragement. So I'm gonna walk to you a little bit about who I am and why I'm here today. Throwback to the 80s. Those are my parents, Mario and Rosie. I am the proud daughter of two incredible, inspiring immigrants from Mexico. My dad is actually Chinese on his mother's side, so she's half Chinese, half Mexican, and then both of them were born in Mexico. And they are one of the reasons why I'm like literally here, but they have been a really source of inspiration. A little bit to understand about my upbringings. Both of them had me when a month after they turned 18. So both of them were teen parents. They had been migrating from one place to another, and they're still together. They just celebrated their 34th year anniversary as a couple together, and I'm the oldest of three children. So that has really informed a lot of the way that I see the world and the way that I try to show up in this space and in general in life. A little bit about that as well. You see a couple of pictures that really inform my journey. I was many years ago. I was born in Tijuana, Mexico, just only 15 minutes walking distance from the US side. So as I think about my journey coming to the United States, my journey of growing up in Mesa, Arizona, in the borderlands again between Mesa and Gilbert. Anybody from Arizona, born and raised, or maybe raised since you were a kid? Okay, so not a lot, about half of you all. So East Valley on that side, that's what I ended up coming when I was in middle school. But something that I think it's really important before my journey was about the reason why of my migration. I often think about what would have my life or my pathway would have been if I would have been born in the US side, and what would have that meant. At that time, my parents were perfectly happy in Tijuana. They never thought of moving. They were working class at that time. I was born in the 90s, so my dad was selling cassettes and he was a hustler trying to figure it out, a way for him to continue to pursue entrepreneurship. And that's what he always did, right? He would have never called himself an entrepreneur, but it was always about, I want to be my own boss so then I can provide what is best for my family. And many years later, when I was in the 5th grade, at the age of about 9 years old, my mom came to school. I used to go to a private Catholic elementary school. She came, I was calling to the principal's office, and my principal used to be a nun, so I was terrified as a 9-year-old. And I just remember typically if you were called into the nun's office or the principal's office was not a good sign. So I was really scared as a little 9-year-old. But at that moment, I got there, I saw the nun sitting there, and then my mom sitting on another chair. And then she just looked at me and said, Reyna, go back to the classroom, get your backpack. And that was the last time I saw my friends and my teachers. I never really got a time to say goodbye. And there was very little to no explanation about why we were moving. I didn't even know we were moving. I just thought that, maybe something happened and we're going to come back. But that was not the case. What ended up happening was that we migrated to another border town, Nogales, which is about 3 hours south from here. And I lived there in the in-between. That's what I call it, in the in-between space where my dad ended up migrating first to the US. And then my mom, my younger brother, and I would go to Nogales. And then on Fridays, my mom would pick me up from school. Then would drive to Chandler, Arizona over the weekend. And on Mondays at 4 a.m., we would go back to Nogales and I will be dropped off in front of my school. So that was my life for 3 years. At that time, as a little kid, thinking about 9 to approximately like 12 years of age, I was just confused. And I started building a lot of resentment and a lot of anger towards my parents because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know why we kept moving places. I didn't know why I couldn't give my phone number to my friends, why nobody could get to know where we were. And there was all this like fear and anxiety that was really loom around my childhood that I didn't have the language or the words to really describe it. Many, many years later, when my dad got in deportation proceedings because he was working and they were asking him if he was a US citizen, he said the truth, and that's how he ended up getting in deportation proceedings. I learned that the real story of my migration journey was because he had been kidnapped by Mexican police. And he did everything in his power. He went to the equivalent of the Attorney General's office. And when he went there, that's when he found out that the police were the ones behind the kidnapping. So as I think about it and I reflect now as an adult, it was really hard to process all those feelings and all those emotions about feeling angry at my parents, and all of those feelings turned into nothing but a deep sense of gratitude, admiration, and love for the big courageous decision that my parents did to leave everything behind just to look for my safety and the safety of my brother at that. So oftentimes when we talk about immigration, when we talked about what is going on sometimes at the border and we get to see these pictures, we forget that we're talking about real human beings, that sometimes we don't know why they are migrating, what is the real story, and how our legal system is not really equipped to support us to get in line and do it the right way. Because for me, it's like, if you're a father who you were kidnapped and who you endure so much trauma, how are you gonna wait in order to protect your children? So as an adult, that's something that I always reflect about, and I think about what are the stories of the people that don't get to be heard in our public discourse when we're talking about immigration. So I went on. I didn't know a word of English. I mainly knew restroom and maybe I knew how to count 1 to 10. So when I got to middle school, it's hard enough. We're like growing, developing, trying to find who we are. So that was a very challenging time, but eventually I went into high school. Anybody from the East Valley here? No? Where about? Where did you go to high school? Shout it out. Campo Verde? You guys saw hands? Highland. So I went to Mesquite High School down in Gilbert. So I went there and like my teacher said, you have to learn English, which I did, and then you have to make this 10-year plan. How many of you started working on your 10-year plans or maybe already have a 10-year plan, just out of curiosity? Okay, some of you still have a 10-year plan. That's awesome. Good for you. Well, I thought as a 17-year-old, I thought I had it figured out. I've done everything my teachers told me. I had my 10-year plan. I was going to graduate from Mesquite High School. I was going to go to Arizona State University, graduate with a degree from political science, going to law school to Notre Dame, get my law degree in international human rights law, and then work for the United Nations. As a 17-year-old, I had it all planned out, and I thought that I was going to make it happen. Because, I had good grades, I was doing community service, I have done everything my teachers told me. And out of the sudden, when I'm going through all of that, and when it came down to applying to college, I was having a conversation with the front row about many of them are first-year college students, and I was just reflecting back in my own journey, right? And at that moment, when I was applying for everything, I had been receiving all these merit-based scholarships based on my GPA and my community involvement. But then when it came down to accept them, they all asked me for a social security number. And as an undocumented student at that time, I couldn't provide one. So I had to turn down all those scholarships. So I would say that was the first heartache that I was able to really see, besides not knowing English, about the impediments of what it really meant not to have an immigration status and the possibilities and different types of journeys that I was going to have. So as you can tell, I did do a couple of them, but I did come to Arizona State University. So I was on the second stop. I was the recipient of a private scholarship, and that's how I made it to Arizona State University. I was taking 21 credits every single semester. I did my double major and a minor in 4 years because I thought that, that was the way of really paying it forward for those private individuals that really believed in me. And I also felt very guilty. I felt very guilty for those students who didn't have the same opportunities that I did, that were as brilliant or more brilliant than I was, and that just wanted a shot. So growing up in Gilbert Mesa, Arizona, the majority of people who went to school with me didn't look like me, didn't share my background from an ethnicity perspective, from an immigration status perspective. And something that it was really evident to me, it was that I was being put all these barriers because of my immigration status. So when I came to ASU, I started meeting other people who were dreamers or who were undocumented youth who were doing something about their lives. At that moment, there was a big push for the Dream Act. So many of you probably were very, very young at that time. But in 2010, there was a huge push for the Dream Act, which would have been a federal legislation that would have provided a pathway to citizenship for people like me who came to the United States as a young person, as a kid, and are going to school, want to improve themselves. But at that time, also the rhetoric was very, very challenging here in Arizona. So many of you are in the social transformation, social justice classes, and part of that SB 1070 that maybe you will start hearing about it really was a policy that was passed in the state legislature and signed by Governor Brewer, who technically created racial profiling for a lot of people in the state of Arizona. We had a horrible reputation. It was called the Show Me Your Papers law. Even citizens were pulled over who didn't appear to be American, whatever that means, that then they were pulled over and they were asked for the documentation. So during that time, it was a very challenging time for us, but I was so tired of hearing stories about immigrants that were inaccurate, that were not really factual, and that didn't represent my community. So I like to bring myself back to when I was 19 years old, when I was about probably your age, and being a college student and saying it doesn't have to be this way. We can do something about it to change it. So I decided to share my story publicly. We were 5 of us who shared for the first time that we were undocumented students. And at that time, the risk was very high because people could deport you. So I've been scared all my life since I realized and acknowledged my immigration status and my situation. But I believe that if it's going to be me, if it's going to take me to speak out for those who are too afraid, I will do it. And that was the moment that I decided to no longer live in the shadows and to bring my story as a tool for people to connect and for people not to see immigrants as something that is foreign, that is dangerous, or that they have a very limited side of who we are as people. I went on in my journey to graduate from ASU, and I was acknowledged as the most outstanding undergraduate student at the Hispanic Convocation. But that moment that should have been of celebration and joy, I don't know if you can see, I'm looking down. And I was looking down because I was feeling so disempowered. I was feeling trapped. I was feeling I've done all these degrees. I've hustled. I've done, again, what my professors told me, the advice that they gave me. And then yet I get to walk out of here and I'm still undocumented. I'm not going to be able to continue to go into law school. I'm not going to be able to continue to pay it forward for all the sacrifices that my parents made. So I was feeling really defeated. And as at that moment, when you don't see in this picture, after I looked down, I look up, and right there was my mom and my dad and my siblings, and my parents had the biggest smiles in their faces. And as a first-gen college graduate, it was such a powerful moment for my family. And I was reminded that no matter what politicians, what other people would think or say about me, I knew who I was. I knew my family, and education, nobody could take that away from me. Even if I were to be deported, nobody could take away the relationships, the lessons, and everything that I have learned thanks to my professors and my mentors. So that was a really important lesson as a young adult. And I really made it about my mission to figure out, how do we make sure that younger generations are not in the same situation as I am? How do I engage and really build bridges and think about what does it look like to build allyship? Because what I found out that every time that I would share my story or I would come out of the shadows, majority of people had never met an undocumented person. Even people who were against immigrants or illegal immigration, because I think that that's the big misconception, right? It's like, well, I'm not against immigrants or immigration. I'm just against illegal immigration. But people don't know the facts. They don't know that the last time that we truly have an immigration reform was in 1986. I wasn't even born there. So I think that that's a lot of the misconceptions and misinformation that I started hearing around. So being able to talk to people about it and have that connection rather than attack them really lead from a place of curiosity. I said that we started galvanizing a lot of support. And as I was doing that community organizing after I graduated ASU, I went on to work for local and national campaigns. And even though that was still that like story that I had learned as a little kid, that no matter what I did, it was never good enough. And when my dad got in deportation proceedings, my mental health completely eroded. And it was a very difficult moment because I couldn't celebrate Christmas, I couldn't celebrate birthdays, and I couldn't really see him. And I started seeing the impact that it had on my brother, my sister, and my mom. My brother at that time, he was in high school. My sister was just barely starting kindergarten, and I really got to experience family separation. So in one hand, I was this advocate, this community organizer, and then in this other hand, I was living firsthand the impact of family separation. I didn't have to read about it. I didn't have to see it on the news. My family was experiencing that. And at that moment, I really started really figuring out like, what can I do to continue to cope? And dance was my safe haven. Any artists in the room? No? So a couple one. So you can, I believe in the power of what, right? That sometimes you can probably tell I'm an extrovert, but sometimes there are certain emotions that are very difficult to cope and to share and to express. So I found my safe haven in dance and in poetry. And I had been dancing since I was a little girl, but in the dance floor, I was able to dedicate so many dances to my dad, and that was a way for me to connect with him despite that we were miles and miles away. Thankfully, he was released, and we were able to be reunited after 9 months of being separated. He then went on in fighting his immigration case. As I mentioned, we at that time didn't know he could have petitioned for asylum because of the real reason of our migration was because he was kidnapped. And unfortunately, his coworker was actually killed. And that coworker was the person who advised him that he really needed to leave the country. So for me, it's always bittersweet that it comes to that, that if my dad would have not had that coworker who gave him that advice and he would have made that courageous decision, maybe I wouldn't be here standing in front of you. And I don't know what would have been the fate of my family. So I always think about when we are having these conversations, it's really important to suspend our judgment and to think about why are the reasons that people are migrating in the first place. And we have to imagine like what could have been so bad in order for people to make that decision where you're gonna go to a country that you don't know the language, that sometimes you're not gonna be welcome, and there's going to be so many barriers from going to school, from getting to work, to getting a driver's license in order for them to survive. So unfortunately, my family story is not unique. There are about 18 million mixed immigration status families living in the United States. The majority of them are U.S. citizens. A good majority, we're talking about 30% of them are U.S. citizens, who are mainly children of undocumented parents. Approximately 60% of the mixed immigration status families are undocumented or are in this like trying to document or fix their documentation. But just for you to put it in context, remember my dad was in deportation proceedings. We were able to run a campaign. He got out. It took him from 2012 to 2019 to be in deportation proceedings for him to win his asylum case. And then in 2019, when he presented himself in front of an immigration judge and they were able to say, you've been approved, he then had to go and apply for his green card, and he just received it a month ago. So from 2019 to 2024, he was waiting for his green card. And then guess what? How even more messy it gets. Even though that my brother and I were children when we first migrated, and the real reason why we migrated was because of his kidnapping, because we were 21 when he got asylum in 2019. We were over the age of 21. We don't qualify. So right now I'm protected by the DACA program. So it's my brother and I have a sister. My sister is 17 years old. She's in high school and she's one of those US citizens who are born here. My parents, both of them now are green card holders, are legal permanent residents, and they will become citizens pretty shortly. My mom in 2 years, my dad in 5. But then even if, let's say, 5 years later, my dad becomes a citizen, he wants to petition for my brother and I, because US citizens can petition for their children. But because we're older, over the age of 21, and because we're Mexican nationals, it'll take at least 25 more years for us to get our citizenship. So what happens in the meantime? And when we're thinking about this population and stories like mine, 18 million mixed status families is almost the same size as Syria, as Guatemala, or the Netherlands, just to put it into context. So I know some of you said, well, what is Aliento all about and what are you up to, right? So that's what really leads me to the work that I get to do and I have the honor and privilege to do with Aliento. Our vision is to really build and co-create a place where the human potential is nurtured and not defined by immigration status. And we really think about it from that holistic lens about children and youth specifically that come with home families, like just like me, that were confused, that don't know the real reason why they migrated, that they were children and they were going through all these obstacles. And how do we really process that emotion? So we really work at the intersections of education, mental health, and the arts. And we talked about our work of transforming trauma into hope and action. And the trauma that we're really talking about is the trauma of not having yourself an immigration status, or maybe your parents, right? There's 1 in 9 children here in the state of Arizona that come from that have at least one undocumented parent. So when we think about this, these are our neighbors, these are our classmates, these are our friends, and sometimes they're suffering in silence. But for us, what was really critical as we are building this work is that we remember that people are not the victims, but they're the protagonists of their lives. So how do we support them and give them the tools to use storytelling, to use education, not only to advocate for themselves, but to also invest in their healing journey? Because as you can imagine, if all the children grow up to be adults, and if we don't process that unprocessed trauma, it's going to come up and show up in different ways. So for us, it's like, how do we heal, but also how do we build allyship and invest in that? So a little bit about, as we're going through it, this section is really about DACA and immigration. So I wanted to really start building some common language with you all. So how many of you have heard the word dreamers? A lot of you. So dreamers, as I mentioned, is typically categorized as undocumented youth who would have qualified for the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act was first introduced in a bipartisan fashion by a senator from Illinois and a senator from Utah, Democrat and Republican, to really provide a pathway to citizenship for people to earn that pathway through education or military service. Nationwide, we're talking about the statistics shows that there are about 2.1 to 3.1 million dreamers population in the whole nation. But when we zoom in into Arizona, we're talking at about 65,000. I'm not so young anymore. I used to be once upon a time, depends who you ask. The average age of a DACA recipient, which is the next category, DACA recipient, in the state of Arizona is about 30 years old. So a lot of the DACA recipients now, they might have been young people when they applied for the DACA program. I was 21 when I applied for the DACA program for the first time back in 2012. The program has been around since 2012, but it's been litigated. So currently, we usually refer to those folks as DACAmented or DACA recipients. And again, this came out of the failure of the DREAM Act, and it was presented by President Obama. But something that I think is really important to note, he didn't do it out of the goodness of his heart. It was the midterm elections of 2012. And young people like me, we were hustling, we were talking, we were doing protests, we were making calls, we were talking to different politicians. And at that time, Marco Rubio, who's a Republican from Florida, was actually running as, again, for president. And what happened is that they were fighting over the Latino vote, and Marco Rubio presented his own version of the DREAM Act, but it was going to be only for military folks. And Obama started getting really worried about losing the Latino vote. And then this is how I feel like all our lives have become really politicized in a way that it's like that sometimes we forget that we're talking about people, because it became then who gets to win over the Latino vote and who caters to a certain segment of the population. But it was really young people like us who decided to put all in the line and to say, we're not going to be afraid anymore. We love the US. This is where we grew up, and we want to be able to pay it forward and stay in our home. The other thing, undocumented, usually undocumented folks are referred as those that lack an immigration status. So they don't have a legal pathway, or maybe they do, but they're waiting for a potential legal pathway. But undocumented immigrants, we don't like to use the I word, the way that I call it, because we feel that it's dehumanizing. And when we're talking about human beings, I think it's important the way that we talk to each other. And this quote is actually from a Holocaust survivor. That is a beautiful writer. If you have read the book Night, it comes from him. So I think that it's important as we're thinking about the languages that we use, especially when we're talking about human beings and the damage that it can create. And I don't think I have to talk to you about the rhetoric that we're hearing in these elections again. And then DACA eligible. So as I mentioned, the DACA program was stopped during the Trump administration, and it has been in ongoing litigation since 2017. So there's a lot of young people that would have qualified for the DACA program, but because it was stopped and it's been litigated, there's about 100,000 people nationwide that won't be able to receive an outcome of their application. They paid, they submitted their fingerprints, they did everything right. And then because of the ongoing litigation, their case hasn't been resolved. So that's how we refer as the DACA eligible population. And mixed immigration status families that we already talked about is like people like me who some of their parents might be US citizens or undocumented, and their siblings, and you have just different immigration statuses. Why does that matter? I think it's when you're thinking about human beings and people, right, is there's this guilt component or this shame about that I've seen, especially among siblings, when the siblings were born here and they get to have certain opportunities that maybe their other siblings who were not born here have. So it's really important that we're thinking about it from like a family unit and really understanding how that impacts whole communities, despite of their immigration status, right? A lot of the students that I get to work at Aliento talked about the rite of passage about getting a cell phone when they were in the 5th grade during the Arpaio raids, during the Show Me Your Papers law of 2010. Now those young people are your age, they're in their early 20s. And they talked about getting that cell phone in the 5th grade because they wanted to know if there was an emergency in case if parents were being pulled over or in deportation proceedings. They were worried that they were going to be put into foster cares. Because if you are not able to have a US citizen that can claim you, they can potentially be put in foster care houses. And with a population that they obviously have parents, right? So I think that that's something that has been really challenging to think through about how these policies and lack of inaction for so many years since 1986 is actually harming people and creating more division than solutions. So think of demographics. I think a big misconception around immigration is that it's typically only from Latin America. You would see that traditionally since the 1965 Act, there was an Immigration Act in 1965 that really started changing the patterns of immigration, of those of you who might be more familiar. So since then, we've seen a bigger concentration from Latin America. You see approximately 60% from Mexico just alone, and Central America about 20%. The fastest growing population is actually from South Asia, that we're having a lot of undocumented community there. So that's something to be mindful about, that when we're thinking about the undocumented community, it's just not a Latino issue, but encompasses different demographics across our globe. And many reasons why. We got to see that a little bit before. So let's dive in here in Arizona. Those of you who are from here, but if not, you're living here, so might as well know a little bit about it. So Arizona's population, 7.4 million approximately. Out of those 7.4, 200,000 children live with at least one unauthorized or undocumented family member. Close to 500,000 of the total Arizona population live or have a family member that is unauthorized to be here. And 1 in 9 Arizona students in our K-12 systems live in a mixed status families. Majority of them are US citizens. It's about 5.5 million nationwide that are US citizens. And every year from our Arizona high school, there's approximately 2,000 undocumented students that graduate every single year. And that was really critical for us in our advocacy because just up to 2 years ago, you still had to pay 3 times more as an international student to go to college, even though that you pay taxes if you're undocumented here in Arizona, your parents pay taxes. I think that's another misconception that undocumented people don't pay taxes. It's not that I go to the store and be like, hey, I want to buy Sephora and I'm undocumented, please don't tax me, right? It doesn't work like that. Every time that I pay not only for sales and property taxes, but also there's something called an ITIN number, individual taxpayer identification number, that you actually file your taxes every single year. So the US government has said you can get this number that is also a 9-digit number, like a social security number. You cannot work with it, but we'll take your money for the taxes, but then you cannot benefit from anything in terms of social security. That's another big myth, that undocumented people can access public benefits. That's a huge misconception. As an undocumented person, you don't have access to any type of Affordable Care Act or anything like that at all. People who have a legal permanent residence and when they have adjusted their immigration status, they could qualify, but if you're undocumented, you do not. So that's a huge, huge misconception that I oftentimes hear when I talk about immigration. So when we talk about the undocumented and DACA community, again, the DACA program is outdated. It has been in litigation since 2017. It's about 10% of our students in high school are eligible for DACA, but they're undocumented right now. 90% of our undocumented youth, as I mentioned, are not eligible for the DACA program. They are eligible to apply, but not longer because you have to be here in the United States by 2007. Which means that the majority of our high school students were born in what year? In the late 2000s. So the program has become completely outdated. So if you were to remove that, that age gap, then you would have more people be able to qualify. So again, if you take anything away from here, when we're talking about the DACA community, it's people typically like me, more young professionals or working professionals in their 30s, not anymore so young anymore. Actually, it's been kind of weird because now that I get to work with a lot of the young students, we work from 7 to 24. They're like, oh yeah, I was born here, but my parent is DACA. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting old. But it's been interesting because that's something that we have seen that is not only outdated because it's not supporting the younger people as it was intended to do, but now we've been in this legal limbo where people brought in their biometrics, they came forward, they turned all the paperwork to the government, and now we can potentially be at risk of deportation if the Supreme Court decides to take away the program. So I think that those are some of the things that when we're thinking about this, it has become so polarized and politicized that we don't think about folks are having businesses. Like I employ a lot of US citizens that are depending on me to run a successful nonprofit for them to provide for their families. So oftentimes it's not only the direct impact that it has on the human beings that maybe have US citizen children now, or their own impact about getting deported to a place that they don't know, but they also are part now of our fabric and they're creating jobs for American citizens too. So oftentimes when we talked about this, we might think that it's so far removed and it's not gonna impact us, but in reality it will. So this is a little bit more on the legal update for all my justice studies and political science aficionados. So where we are here in terms of the legal update with the DACA program, it is currently just last week, it had a hearing on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals where they're litigating the constitutionality of the DACA program. The lawsuit was brought by a Texas attorney general. So that's been kind of the politics of that. They have already made a decision at the district court, so then they appealed it. It went to the First Circuit. Then from there, we can potentially project a decision. So when you have a hearing, there's no decision. There's a lot of anxiety that comes to just hearing the arguments. You can kind of start predicting, but then you don't have an outcome. With any timelines when it comes to the courts, you don't have a specific date, right? It's always kind of ambiguous. You don't know exactly when they're making decisions, but you can kind of get a projected way if it's going to happen in the winter or in the summer, depending on the docket. So we might be able to hear a decision as early as winter 2024. And then the next step from that, most likely is going to continue to get litigated. And then we can have a hearing as soon as spring of 2025 of the next year. And then if they hear it, then we can potentially have an outcome on fall 2025. So what does that mean? Currently with the DACA program, you are protected from deportation and you get a work permit. I can legally work in the United States with that work permit. If they decide to take away the DACA program, I become again undocumented. And I would be at risk of being deported from this country to a place where my father fled, Mexico, for violence, and that I haven't lived there. I don't know. I have no roots to that. The other potential outcome, if they decide to delay it, could also be that it can be as early as fall 2025 or as late as summer 2026. So that's the context of immigration, how outdated it is, how there's no really pathway for people to just kind of go to the DMV and get a driver's license. There's not a real line for people to really follow the legal pathway. The only ways that you can become a U.S. citizen currently is by a sponsorship of a family member. And as I mentioned, right, my dad will become a citizen. And even if he sponsors me, depending on where you're from and how old are you, it could take up to 25 years. That's how it currently is. The other way is by marriage. That's the fastest way, but also it has to be legal marriage. So if it's not legal and you get caught, that's fraud and you will be taking that away, right? And both people get in trouble. But by marriage, if you enter the country with a visa, I'm actually a visa overstayer. I had a tourist visa. Being a border kid, you usually go back and forth a lot. So if you came with a visa and you marry a U.S. citizen, then usually your process takes anywhere between 3 to 6 months. But if you came without a documentation or enter without inspection, or in simple terms, you came without papers, then you get a 10-year bar, even if you marry a citizen. And you have to petition in your country of origin. Those are the current legal pathways that exist. The other ones that is very, very little, once a year, there's something that is called H-1B visa. I'm not gonna get into the nitty-gritty on the immigration law, but it's technically employment for high skills. So we also have to think about language, right? High-skilled immigrants. So typically people that have very technical degrees, like think about computer scientists, physicians, and all of that. But there's only a 65,000 visas allowed. So then technically it's kind of like a lottery. You can apply, you can do everything, but if you're not selected as one of the 65, you don't have a legal pathway. So when I think about the narrative around immigration and everything that is happening in context about the demographics, I feel that both political parties have really taken advantage of the American people, misinformation of how the actual legal system works, and that is non-functional. And rather than saying like having this very not accurate definition about why don't you just do it the right way, the way my grandparent did it, people sometimes they don't know their story and they don't know what was in place in the immigration laws when maybe your grandparent or great grandparent migrated to the US. So I think that that's been, I feel like a big miscommunication and lack of knowledge about how our real immigration system works. And I feel DACA is a great example that when people are given the opportunity to come forward to have a pathway, even though that's not a pathway to citizenship, that people can come forward, say like, hey, this is who I am. I will submit my biometrics. I will do and provide all the paperwork that you say. People will do it. So it's not a matter of people not wanting to break the law, but then there's not a current system that is functional. So hopefully I don't lost you too much into the weeds, but here we go. This is the most exciting thing that we get to do at Aliento. We work in busting those misconceptions and those myths, but also supporting the undocumented community and a lot of U.S. citizens of undocumented folks. We have 3 programs. We use arts as a form of healing, where we have fellowships in elementary schools, where we do open mics, we do support groups with therapists to really bring a space where people can feel whole, they can feel supported, and they can feel seen. We also have, and the reason why we do this is because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of this constant shame, anxiety, depression, and fear that happens with constantly feeling that you're the professional foreigner. There's been many studies that show that a lot of immigrant communities, despite of their immigration status, despite if they have a legal status or not, or if they were born here but their parents are undocumented, they constantly feel that they don't belong. So for us, it's like, how do we provide programmings and support systems for folks to feel seen, to feel heard, and to be reminded that they do belong here, and then they're part of what makes Arizona so beautiful and rich. We also have our leadership development program where we really focus mainly with high school and college age students to really support them on how to go to college. The majority of the students that we see are first generation students. Even if my parents wanted to help me, they have never been to college. So it's not that I could have called mom or auntie to figure out the college application system. So we really support them on how to really go to college, find those pathways. For some of them, they might want to love to come to ASU. Some of them might want to start a community college, or maybe they want to take over the family business. So it makes sense more to have a career and technical career that they can start, maybe that is more short term. So we really support them to that. We have a paid fellowship where we give them a stipend and we take them as a cohort model. But what is really cool about that is that their whole premise is to bring Aliento into their school campuses, to build allyship, to have conversations like this, and to do it not so much in a lecture format like this, but how do we do open mics, or how do we have painting classes or things like that, that you can start building community and building connection so you can get to know a little bit of more about the immigrant experience. We also take about 300 students to the state capitol. So as I mentioned, I was one of the people that was impacted by not having access to in-state tuition, even though that I've been here almost all my life. So we take students to the state capitol from all across the state of Arizona, approximately 300, to really talk and engage with elected officials. And because of our young people, courage and advocacy and ability to organize their allies to say that, hey, we want to do something about it, we were able to convince both Republicans and Democrats to put in the hands of the voters a proposition called 308 that would give in-state tuition and allow people to pay in-state tuition to go to college. So this is a little bit about the work that I get to see and that I have the honor and privilege to see. This is Delia Garcia, who was a student at MCC. Now she graduated with a bio degree and is working at a banner. She is a DACA recipient. And because Prop 308, she was able to not only claim that story, right, and claim that victory, but she worked for it. She was able to talk to elected officials, to talk to their peers. And then now she's working at a hospital and supporting all Arizona families. So as I think about the work that I do, I've been able to really go beyond my story and figure out what are the barriers and the challenges, but how are we equipping the next generation to be the protagonists and not only the storytellers, but the strategists of their own lives, because we're not victims, we are the protagonists of our own lives, and we're not asking for a handout, we're just asking for opportunities to continue to contribute to this state and this nation that we love. So with that said, I wanted to just give you a little bit of pictures and the scope of our work. We're a little bit everywhere. We go to schools, we table, we have conversations. We're able to provide those programs for young people that might be too afraid to share their status. We are educating them a Prop 308 that now passed, that they can go to college. They don't have to pay 3 times more. They can have access to scholarships. Right now, we did a huge FAFSA campaign. How many of you know about FAFSA? Yeah, how many of you have actually applied for FAFSA if you feel comfortable? How many of you would be here in college without FAFSA? Very few, right? We see those hands come lower and lower. A lot of US citizens, just because their parents are undocumented, had a big trouble applying for FAFSA and they were getting stuck in the process. So we did this national campaign and started like advocating to make sure that they were not gonna be discriminating for not applying for FAFSA. So these are a couple of things. We try to do things fun. We partnered up with influencers. We're in the media, but really having our students be the storytellers and really connect with other young people. Because again, I'm not as young anymore. So I just give them the mic and they do great. So where do we go from here? I want to have some time to open it up for Q&A, but I would not be doing my job if we don't have a call to action. I do have teachers, stickers, and some pledges. So if you want some stickers and t-shirts, you will have an incentive to participate. Or if you follow us on social media, I'll definitely get you some swag. But I wanted to let you know, how many of you are registered to vote here in the state of Arizona? Okay, a big majority of you. If my math is right, about 75% of this room. I, as a DACA recipient, I cannot vote. It is illegal for people who are not citizens to vote. It doesn't happen despite of what the misinformation that you might be hearing, but something that is going to be on your ballot, something that as a nonprofit organization, we can never tell you who to vote for. We don't endorse any political candidates. We can't get behind issues. So Prop 314, it's going to be in your ballot. The Arizona State Legislature was working on something called HCR 2060 that then became 314. So all of those of you who have received your ballot, I'm definitely not supporting Prop 314. And I want to tell you why, but at the end of the day, I'm a believer in our democracy and our republic and in education. So I just encourage you to go beyond the headlines and do your research. If you don't believe me, if you don't want to take my word for it, I don't take offense of that, but hopefully regardless of where you are or what you believe, at least you're walking away from here with a little bit more curiosity and for you to do the research about what is in your ballot and who is it gonna potentially harm. So I talked about it 370. So Prop 314, these are some things that it would do. It would allow people to really ask if you have legal permit papers to be here. Immigration is a federal matter. Local enforcement is not trained and equipped to do that. Actually, Arizona has paid many millions of dollars because of the misuse of asking and inquiring people for their documentation. And guess who gets to pay for that? Us, taxpayers. So if you think it's like, even if you're like, you know what, if you're from my spectrum, I want to be an ally for my undocumented friends, or you're like, I don't really care about this issue. If you care or not, or wherever you are in the spectrum, 314 can impact you, and it's going to impact your pockets too. So I think it's helpful for you to know that. So again, currently Phoenix Police is under investigation under the Department of Justice because of breaking the law. Maricopa paid $350 million in a lawsuit for discrimination based on SB 1070, and 314 mirrors that. So what it would do, public benefits, it is, I already told you, it is currently illegal for undocumented people to access public benefits. So it's just doubling down more from a rhetoric perspective. But let's say that if someone who doesn't know that it's illegal for them to get public benefits, and then they go to the hospital because their kid is sick, they're undocumented, they're trying to get that, they will get a Class 6 felony if they don't show the proper documentation, just because of asking for help. We already denied them. That's the current law. This would make it even harder, and it would not only deny them, but would give them a felony. Unlawful entry, it would criminalize in Arizona. To be here in Arizona, it would be, again, another felony if you didn't come through a legal port of entry. How would you know? How would you know if someone is not here legally? That's the thing that it doesn't seem practical. Technically, I came through a legal port of entry with my visa, but I can still be undocumented even if I came through a legal port of entry. But how would you know that? So people would have to ask questions. So what is the impact? Currently, it has no funding, it has no training, and it would really give all the authority to police officers to be asking and inquiring that, and how are they going to make those determinations? Again, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be paying another $325 million. We're already in a deficit in the state of Arizona, 1.3 billion deficit. That means that they're going to have to cut in other programs, and usually education and childcare programs are the first ones to go. Another thing around that, it is being sold as a fentanyl. My heart hurts because there's a lot of victims of the fentanyl crisis. There is a huge problem on fentanyl. But then right now, there's this misconception that they're trying to blame immigrants for the fentanyl crisis, when actually 90% of the fentanyl that comes to the United States of America comes through legal ports of entry. Not through undocumented people, but through the legal ports of entry. That's 90%, you all. But then this one, it's making it seem and associating it that if this passes, it's going to help solve the fentanyl crisis, when it does nothing to deal with the root causes of that. The other thing that it has employment authorization. So currently, again, if you are working for any type of employer under a W-2, we already have E-Verified in the state of Arizona. So then that's our current law. 314 will give you a felony if you're not able to provide E-Verified and you get caught. So again, it creates more penalties for individuals who are just trying to work. And then last but not least, it gives a lawful enforcement immunity. So then if they are breaking the law, if they're not following proper law and protocol, it won't give any access to people to be able to go against them. So again, if you don't want to take my word for it, please just don't read the little paragraph on it. Do your research, know what is that, and don't get fooled by what it's there. And again, I highly encourage you, don't take my word for it. Fact check me all you want. I would want that, because that means that you're being informed. And at the end of the day, that's all I can ask for. If you make your own decisions and if you decide to support it or be against it, at least you have made an informed decision and you know what you signed up for. So with that, for us, it is a very anti-immigrant measure. We think that it's going to have a lot of very difficult challenges. So as we know, we went through the primary. Many of the elected officials, I got to talk to them, and they said that they did this because they just wanted to mobilize their base. Whenever I asked them, if you're saying that you don't want to target dreamers, why are you doing that? They were only trying to use languages like fentanyl and border security to really go into people's fears rather than actually solving the problem. So right now, if you are registered to vote, just a friendly reminder, the last day to request your ballot by mail, if you want to vote early, is October 25th. If you want to send your ballot via mail, make sure you do that before the 29th, so then your vote can be casted. November 1st is the last day to drop off your ballot and vote early. And then November 5th, if you don't want to do it early, you can still go to the polls. Make sure you do it between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. If you are in line by 7 p.m., your vote must count. But if you're there by 7:01, it won't count. So don't let procrastination be a deterrent. 314, again, it's really gonna help. It's gonna harm a lot of families like mine. I wanted to give you a quick snapshot before I open it up for folks, because many people have really utilized the criminalization aspect, or saying that, oh, we don't wanna, this is not gonna harm people. This is just gonna harm the bad people. And I think that that's a big myth. The majority, 70% of all deportations last year in Arizona have been because people don't have a legal paperwork. If you're undocumented in the state of Arizona, you cannot get a driver's license. If you don't get a driver's license and you get pulled over, then you lose your car and your car can get impounded. And then you can potentially go to jail if you're not able to find identification. And then that's how people find out that you're undocumented, because in jail, they have a collaboration with immigration, and that's how people start in their deportation pipeline. That is the most common way that people do that. And when people say, oh, some of them have felony, well, guess what? Working without papers in the state of Arizona is a felony. So something for you to think about as we are moving and closing out. So if you have felt compelled and if you want to get involved, we are 18 days away from election day. You don't have to be an expert, but you can definitely come and support us. Our goal is to reach 50,000 voters. So far, we have already made over 40,000 calls, and we've been knocking on doors to really support and educate people on a pro-immigrant and pro-education platform. These are a couple photos from our folks from a couple of elections. And here's a way that you can get involved if you want to take out your phone or if you want to do it after. But this would be, we are located in Phoenix and we're doing canvases out of Phoenix and Mesa. So we really try to spread out. I'm going to hang out for a little bit if you want to do it after. But since you are an ASU student, guess what? Today is the day that you can get involved. ASU, we have a chapter. Remember how we told you that part of our model is to have students empowered to go to their schools? We have been having a chapter here, Aliento at ASU. You can catch them on the Instagram. And then there's also another QR code. They have a phone banking session today here on campus. So you can definitely check it out or go on social media. But with that said, I wanted to thank you for listening to my story, for listening to the work that I do. And I always like to close out with a Mayan proverb and an African proverb that really inspire me when I feel down. And one of them that is called In Lakesh, that means you are my other me, or tú eres mi otro yo, which reminds us about this also spirit of the African proverb about Ubuntu, that my humanity side to yours, your humanity side to mine. So as we're having these very complicated issues around immigration, around society and government, let's not forget that we're human beings, and let's remember to lead from that place of humanity. So thank you all. I have about 10 minutes for questions. So feel free to ask any questions that you have. I'll also stay around. If you do, show me proof that you did. This is for our continued support. We would love to hear your feedback. If you do this attendance, you can call the name Seeking Justice at ASU. And then if you do the attendance, I'll give you a sticker, or if you follow us on social media, but I'll open it up for questions.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Whoa, Suba.
Thank you, Suba.
I have a question about your program. Through like the Cultiva program, it like focuses on arts and programming. With like, I don't know if any of the students do paintings, but do you guys collaborate with like not ASU, like Arizona museums to showcase the arts and stuff?
We just celebrated our 7th art gallery at the Hurt Museum. So we actually created about 30 pieces of all impacted folks that were undocumented children as young as 7 all the way to their family members. And we curated the art at the Hurt Museum, and then we had live performances. We also have a facilitator program that we paid our facilitators and we train them in trauma informed. We just trained 20 facilitators in August. So if you're interested in getting more involved, if you're really curious to that, we do have some paid and volunteer opportunities. So the best way is to go through our social media channels. And we just had that one at the Hurt Museum where we're going to be having an open mic in December. So make sure you check it out. And then our next annual gallery would be hopefully in another museum next year.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne, and first I'd like to thank you for coming. I did learn a lot, and I know like during like your presentation, you mentioned how now you're kind of getting more social media with like influencers and having like the people, like the younger generation represent you. So my question is, as society evolves, do you see the way in which people advocate for immigration changing as society changes with it?
Great question, Cheyenne. Thank you for asking it. I have seen a lot of differences from like I'm a millennial, so and then a lot of the folks that I get to work with are Gen Z. So I think that there's a little bit more curiosity about getting involved. I see that people are more open to be like being more values driven and being really with causes that they get behind, which I think is a beautiful thing. Something that I have seen that is an area of improvement would be that sometimes because we are seeing our world from our own lenses and because of social media, sometimes we get bubbled up we're only hearing from the people that think like us. So something that I have seen that has really harmed some of the advocacy around immigration or other issues is that we have like support, but it's not a strong support, and we're not doing the work of building bridges. So for example, what I'm seeing, and thankfully, like our young people are so powerful and they're willing to be humble and learn about it. But it's like there's a lot of power in engaging with people that don't think like you, because that's how you're able to demystify a lot of the myths. So I would say that that's an area that like advocacy has shifted, that I feel that is being more social media led, and sometimes people have a hard time talking to people that don't think like them. And I feel that that's creating a huge vacuum that is really needed for us to hit critical masses to ensure that we are holding our elected officials accountable, because over 80% of the American public of US voters actually support a pathway to citizenship for the undocumented people. But that's not what you're hearing on the media. So I think that that's something that I have seen that it's a great way of opportunity, but something that I have loved is that people are more willing to act and do something about it. I don't know if that answers your question.
Do you ever think that you're gonna expand Aliento to like other states, or like collab with other states to do this like in schools like you're doing right now?
That's a great question. We've actually led campaigns where we have organized 20 different states. When the DACA program got rescinded, we were able to organize, as I mentioned, 20 states where we took over the state capital. We were there for 4 months, talking to every single senator. I personally talked to all the senators except 2, Schumer and McConnell. And then we talked to 335 out of the 435 members of Congress. So we got really close from getting something forward. Unfortunately, it failed, but we have been having a lot of conversations. Our young people are actually pushing us to bring Aliento into their community. So we do a lot of trainings for other schools. At the end of the day, we are a nonprofit, so it comes down to money and resources. So the big next dream is to have a fellowship that is not only in Arizona, but nationwide, so we can support young people across the nation.